What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikaPikaPaPa, and as you all know, this is absolutely one of my favorite data sets that we look at every single month. And I might even go as far as to say it is my favorite data set. And that's because when I'm thinking about keeping my finger on the pulse of what's going on in the hobby at a macro level, I don't think there's a better piece of information than what we're going to go through today. Now, we're going to look at this first slide at the high level at the grading volume from the big four, right? We're going to look at grading volume in the TCG space at PSA, SGC, CGC, and Beckett. And then after that, we're going to double click into PSA specifically, because if you look at the graph on the far left, like that has all four of the grading companies and their total grading volume ever since January of 2022. And you'll see that PSA is way up there and everybody else is way down at the bottom, right? So it is good for us to look at PSA because the grading volume that they have is much more indicative of the overall hobby, because their grading volume is by magnitudes of huge numbers higher than everybody else. Now, the one thing I want to call out early on this video is over the last couple months, we've seen some trends that have been negative in the grading space. Not negative in a bad way, but just the overall numbers have been trending in a downward and right trajectory for all of 2024. And I have said it numerous times. I'm like, well, you know, the seasonality trends, we'll see if it pushes through that. Or, well, you know, maybe next month is going to be a recovery month. But while we have seen some all-time highs at PSA, and that is high numbers, right? Like the all-time highest grading months ever at PSA have been in 2 of the last 4 months. Despite that, we have seen the TCG grading volume continue downward and the right. So the grading volume in the TCG space is going down, while PSA volume has been hitting all-time highs. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. I certainly don't think that's a good thing. I think it's just a thing. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think Scarlet and Violet print quality in the beginning is a big part of that. I think the fact that the PSA grading volume in TCG space was really, really high because at the beginning of the year, we were still riding that wave of the Japanese Pokemon grading center being opened up over there, right? PSA opened up a brand new grading facility over in Japan, so we saw all-time high grading numbers in TCG space then. There's a lot of things that led into this downward and the right trajectory, and we're going to look at a graph later on which really illustrates that, and we'll talk more about it then. But I don't want anybody to freak out. Like, I am a huge grader. I think that the grading volume is a big indicator of the investability in the space and how many people are doing that because they think that, hey, listen, raw cards versus graded cards I can make more money off of, obviously, and also from a long-term price appreciation standpoint. So when I see grading volume going down, it doesn't give me warm fuzzies, but no one can argue that the hobby isn't in a great space. I think the hobby is in a fantastic space. So even though we're going to look at some downward trends, I don't want anybody to freak out. I'm certainly not freaking out. I'm still very invested in this hobby. I'm going to continue to be very invested in this hobby because overall, I think that this era, this space that we're in right now is absolutely incredible. Scarlet and Violet single prices are going absolutely nuts. We're starting to see those Sword and Shield prices come back down a little bit, but that was absolutely expected. So overall, we're still in a great place. So with that out of the way, listen, we're going to talk about some really exciting things, and if you enjoy this type of content, this data-driven, finger on the pulse type information, hey, listen, we have an incredible community. I would love it if you hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy the content, give us a thumbs up, and if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. So with that out of the way, let's start talking about what we've seen. Now, I talked about PSA hitting all-time records in terms of grading volumes for the last couple months. Well, if you look, last month was an all-time record. See that that red line there on the top of that items graded by month chart? PSA broke a record last month, and then after that they came sharply down. Okay, so the overall grading volume in PSA was down significantly from last month versus the previous month. But again, when you're coming off of all-time highs, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But it's what scares me, it doesn't scare me, but what gives me cause for concern is this yo-yo effect, right? These pops and flops that you see here over the last 4 months in that red graph, which represents the overall grading volume in PSA month by month. I like to see a smooth and consistent up and to the right. I know that there's going to be jagged edges here and there, but I really don't like these sharp spikes and then sharp drops. As a matter of fact, I sent 12 cards off to PSA to be graded last month on the 14th. And they are already at stage 7. So they have already been received, they've already been cataloged, they've already been graded, they've already made it through quality control 1, and they are now in QC2 phase. I mean, we're talking about a 3-week turnaround time for a value bulk submission. That just doesn't happen, right? Like normally that's a 2 to 3 month submission. So the fact that my cards are getting turned around that quickly tells me that, hey, they must have a whole lot of opportunity there. They must have a whole lot of idle hands to get it kind of pushed through as much. Now, in the graph there in the middle, you will see that those are the other grading companies as well. So because PSA is so high on that first graph, we had to break out the other three into this individual graph so we can actually keep an eye on their trend lines. And you'll see that all three actually were down last month as well. So even though PSA dropped sharply, they were following the same trend as the other grading companies. You see CGC is down, SGC is down. Beckett has just had a really, really rough go of things, really for the last 2 years, and even they were down. So even though SGC and PSA are now into one, PSA is buying SGC, they're still operating as independent subsidiaries, so they're still independent companies working, kind of on their own things, even though they are going to be integrated more and more into the future. But on the graph on the far right there, that's where we look at the actual TCG grading volumes for these individual companies, right? So the two in the middle, those represent overall grading volume, but the one on the right is specific for TCG. Now you'll see PSA's TCG grading volume was down 15% month over month. Now it is up 6% over last year, right? Remember when I said I'm not hitting the panic button yet? I'll show you a graph later on which kind of explains the why. So overall for last year, PSA is up in terms of TCG grading volume. Down 15% month over month, but still up year over year. Then in CGC, CGC's up a little bit in TCG grading space, up 2%, and up a ton year over year, up 175%. Now CGC has this affiliation with a mystery box company, so they do a lot of grading for that. So take that with a grain of salt, but there is a significant increase. They didn't have the partnership last year, so that kind of explains the big jump year over year. And then Beckett is up month over month in the TCG space, up 7%, but down 12% year over year. Poor Beckett. Beckett just can't seem to get together. And then SGC down significantly month over month, but another one with really solid gains year over year. So when you think about those individual companies in its totality, year over year, 3 of the 4 are up in TCG grading volume. That is a good thing. When 3 of the 4 big companies are up year over year in grading volume, especially when you think about what was going on in the hobby last year at this point, right? We had a whole lot of alt art. Sword and Shield was slamming to a close. Like, there was just a lot of excitement in the hobby back then. So the fact that the year over year grading volume in 3 of the 4 companies is up versus such an exciting time last year, again, that is what gives me excitement. That is why I know the hobby is so strong, and that is why even though the overall grading trends in TCG have been down month over month for all of 2024, I'm still pretty pumped up, and I think a lot of you out there are too, because there's still a ton of TCG cards that are being graded. All right, so with that out of the way, let's start looking at some of these individual components. And the very first one that we always look at right here are the most graded sets, and it has been just a slugfest at the very top. It has been Japanese 151 and English 151, just trading the #1 and #2 spot over a long period of time here. Now, Japanese 151 had that reprint recently, and there is a ton of that product out there right now. But remember, these numbers are actualized once the cards are actually graded, okay? So there is a little bit of a lag from, say, when a reprint comes in, people have to buy the product, they have to open the product, they've got to send it to PSA, and then it actually has to be graded to be counted in these numbers. So with that lag, last month, English 151 was #1, but we felt really good that Japanese 151 would take the top spot this month. And guess what? It did. And look at the overall grading numbers for Japanese 151 at 300,000 cards graded versus English 151 at 27,000 cards graded. Now, again, the Japanese set has been out longer. It has gone through a restock, but guess what? English 151 sitting at sub 50% from total grading numbers is awesome, awesome, awesome for me. I'm an English collector. I know that the grading quality isn't quite there because it's, the set from a print quality perspective was a little bit lower, but I think that's going to help give the English 151 cards the opportunity to have more value further down the line versus their Japanese counterparts. The other thing I really love is I love seeing that 1999 Pokemon game up there being graded so much. Again, the Origin set, and that does include base set first edition, it includes Shadowless, it includes base set 2, like all of those versions of the 1999 Pokemon game are lumped into there, but I still love seeing that OG set ranked so high. V-Star Universe is another set that has been absolutely graded into oblivion. It has been at the top of this list for as long as I can remember. Almost 431,000 V-Star Universe cards have been graded. I get it. The set is absolutely fantastic. Those Japanese cards hit totally different, but for 431,000 of them to be graded, man, the long-term value is going to be really, really tough because the volume is going to be so absolutely high. Love seeing Evolving Skies up here. Obviously, Evolving Skies, the biggest and the baddest. The cards are going nuts from a price perspective, so love seeing that up here. Crown Zenith, love seeing Crown Zenith up here. And the surprise to me was seeing Temporal Forces up here so early. Traditionally, we don't see these new released English sets up on these most graded sets from PSA list this early on, so that is extremely exciting for me, and I love it. I love to see the interest on here. The other thing, and we've talked about it in the past, is this market is cyclical, right? English rotates into favor, Japanese rotates out, Japanese will rotate back in at some some point and English will rotate out. It wasn't long ago when this list was dominated by Japanese sets, but now there's only 3 left on the list and we got a whole bunch of English on here. So again, really talks to the cyclical nature of this business, and I think this is a really cool takeaway, and I'm interested to see which one of these 151 sets is going to be on top coming out next month. Now, we always look at the most graded cards, and this is something that has been absolutely fascinating for me to watch with that Pikachu with gray felt hat card sitting there at number 150. It's just incredible, right? There's almost 47,000 of those Pikachu with gray felt hat cards that have been graded, which is a silly number for an ultra modern card, especially a promo card. Like, it is just crazy how many of those cards have been graded, and it's been able to retain its value for the most part. Those raw cards are still going for sub 100 at like $95. That is a crazy amount of money. So the market is still feverish over it, even though that card has been graded into oblivion. The other thing that I think is really cool, and I talked about that 1999, Pokemon set from earlier, but the fact that the Charizard from that set has been on here 3 months in a row. So that specific card, the 1999 Pokemon game Charizard, has been one of the most graded cards for the last 3 months. There was 1,000 of them graded last month. Again, love seeing interest in the origin of the Pokemon card space. Love seeing that card up here. I think that is really, really cool. And then another thing that I thought was really interesting was, again, I talk about how it is rare to see these brand new sets on here so early, but Crimson Haze, the Eevee is on here, so that card is incredibly hot. I think that is really, really cool, and I think that says a lot about why the English one is so high as well, right? The Eevee card is fire. I think the artwork is great. I mean, it's almost a $50 card here on the English side of things, and that is incredible for a brand new illustration rare card. Just absolutely craziness right there. And when you look at this list from top to bottom, from the most graded cards, you see Charizard on here 5 times. Charizard has been dominating the list as of late. If you're watching one of these videos from maybe 6, 7, 8 months ago, you didn't see it dominated by a single character like that. Now, Charizard's obviously the biggest and the baddest from the whole Pokemon space, so that's not overly surprising, but it is really interesting to see Charizard have so much weight in this list over the last 3 or 4 months. My other big takeaway that I thought was really cool is the Magikarp from Triplet Beat over there from the Japanese side of things, right? On our side, it's Paldea Evolved, but that Magikarp card really has been popping off. If you look in the far right column, that's growth for May of 2024 for these individual cards. You see all of them are red except that Magikarp card from Triplet Beat. That is up 31% versus a sea of red. So for whatever reason, that card has absolutely popped off in grading volume over on the Japanese side of things. And again, maybe a lot of people are finding the English one is just too expensive, too rich for their blood, so they're turning away from English, and they're getting some really cool artwork, the exact same card, if not with some better artwork, for a much, much cheaper price over on the Japanese side of things. So I thought that was a really cool takeaway as well. Next thing is, this is my own PikaPikaPaPa creation, and I started this back in December of 2022, right? We started looking at the overall volume of Pokemon TCG cards graded versus what I call ball sports, and that's baseball, basketball, and football combined. And I had this theory, and my theory still stands, is that at some point in the future, I don't know when, I think TCG is going to overtake ball sports for the overall most graded category. Now, you will see that for a long time, the orange line, which is represented by ball sports, and the blue line, which is represented by the TCG space, was really close. So my theory was holding close, right? The lines were they were kind of trading punches, going up and down and up and down. Well, ever since this year, ever since 2024, ball sports has continued to take off, and that trend that I talked about earlier, the TCG space, has been steady Eddie downward and to the right. Now, over last month, we actually saw ball sports drop at a more dramatic rate than Pokemon did, than the TCG space. Now, again, it's not so aggressive that they're starting to gain a ton of ground, but it will be interesting to see if the beginning of this year, we saw the TCG space coming down while ball sports was going up. Now, at least for the last month, we've seen them move in the same direction. So keeping an eye on this is going to be really, really important, especially with the fact that we think there is a ton of really cool Pokemon sets that are going to be launching over the next 12 months. So I don't think it'll be a surprise if we start to see that blue line pop up and we start to see that orange line continue to come back down. So that was a really big takeaway for this video for this month. Next one right here is the most graded subjects. The takeaway from this isn't a whole lot. The names are the exact same, but again, if you look at the overall volume, right, that far right corner, when you see the negatives right there, I mean, it is just a bloodbath from top to bottom. And another thing that I thought was a really cool call out on this is, remember, this is TCG. I know this list always contains almost nothing but Pokemon cards, but this includes all TCGs. This includes Lorcana, it includes One Piece, it includes Pokemon, it includes, anything you can think of is included in this. And to see Monkey D. Luffy on there is really awesome for me because, again, I like the fact that people can diversify what they collect in. I know Lorcana is really popular right now, and obviously One Piece was super, super hot. I don't keep a finger on the pulse of that market, so I'll have to see if it's been cooling off a little bit. But when you look at the growth versus May column right there, yes, it's all red, but if you look, the Monkey D. Luffy is down 31%, where most of the other ones are in, you know, the low teens right there, 11, 13, 11, 15, 13, 11, 9, 7, 4. So the Monkey D. Luffy card had a bigger drop month over month than a lot of the other cards that we've seen. Again, I don't know enough about One Piece to say if the overall market is starting to cool off or not, but the one card from One Piece that we have on here has dropped at a more dramatic rate than the Pokemon stuff. So really fascinating stuff, really cool things to kind of sink our teeth into. The next thing right here is this is the items graded by era and their overall gem rate. So what was cool for me was we saw all of these companies, they had a big boost over the last couple months. When we look at the set era from the 2020s and we looked at the gem rates, they were getting incredibly high. I mean, Beckett was over 80% last month. But this month, we have seen all of them come back down a little bit. So the average gem rate for the 2020s, the ultra modern cards that a lot of us collect and send in to get graded, has actually come back down. Beckett has dropped to 74. And actually, CGC and SGC have dropped below 50%. So they're giving out gem mints at a less than 50% rate for the 2020s cards over the last month, which is really interesting. Beckett has always been the premium because, remember, people send a lot of their best of the best to Beckett trying to get that coveted black label, even though only about 2% of the overall cards said to Beckett get that. But still, that's why their gem rate is so much higher compared to the other companies. PSA is pretty high too, sitting at a 59.2%. So PSA gets a lot of high quality cards as well. Again, I never say that, hey, listen, you should use this as an indicator of where you want to send your cards to get graded. This is really just an FYI and a really cool graph for us because the data is available to us to see the different gem rates by eras, by company. I think this is really, really cool stuff. So the next one right here is what I wanted to talk about, okay? Because this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and this is specifically TCG cards graded by month at PSA. And you will see this goes all the way back to January of 2022, where 213,000 TCG cards were graded. Now, this has changed. I mean, the growth has been incredible. I mean, if you were to trend line this out really all the way until December of 2023, the growth here is absolutely staggering. But what we have seen this year, and what I did call out earlier on, is this trend. From the high of December of 2023 from the TCG card space, it has been a steady Eddie downward and the right decline. So that's not a bad thing. I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. As I've said earlier on, you know, I think the Scarlet and Violet, the fact that they're, you know, the gradability isn't quite there, you know, especially Obsidian Flames and then 151 and Paldea Evolved, right? Like the gem rates in those sets are incredibly low. So I think a lot of those cards aren't making the cut just from the consumer standpoint to send in and get graded. I also think that we had some artificially high numbers. If you look right in front of where that red and black line meet to the right 1 month, that's July of 2023. Guess what happened then? That was when they opened up the PSA grading center in Japan. That was when that grading center got hammered with this huge backlog of Japanese cards, and you saw that big pop up to 514,000 cards graded that month, right? And then we just saw the Japanese volume was so crazy high. Remember how I said those most graded sets and the most graded cards list used to absolutely be hammered with Japanese cards? Well, that's because they opened that new grading center, and I think there was just so much of a pent-up demand that it just was 6 months of just hammering the grading center. So now I think things are starting to normalize a little bit. That's a good thing. I like that. The other thing that I like is that we're still slightly above where we were last year, okay? So even if you look, the black line is all the way back to December of 2022. That red flat line is back to June of 2023, right? So you can see we're still up versus LY. Now, what I do want to see is what's going to be interesting is where do we stack up next month? Now, we know we're not going to be positive off of last year, right? Because as I said, last year is when we saw those Japanese grading center open up and they just get hammered with those grading cards. But is July going to be up versus June? That's what I'm going to look for. That's what I'm going to try and keep a finger on the pulse of. And again, I do think in the long run it's going to be fine because we have some awesome sets coming up, lots of gradables. I think we're going to have some big chase cards, so I'm really excited about that. But this was a really cool graph for us to call out and talk about just the overall trends in the TCG grading space. And the final one right here, we always end with this, is like, listen, 2 of the last 4 months, PSA has broken records for the most graded cards ever in a month. That is incredible. That is good. And I always end with the same thing, and I hope you don't get tired of hearing it, but a strong card market, whether it's baseball, whether it's basketball, whether it's football, whether it's hockey, whether it's soccer, whether it's Pokemon, whether it's Lorcana, whether it's One Piece, all of us benefit from that. All of us want the card industry as a whole to be strong. All of us want this card industry to be viewed as an investment vehicle, as an alternative asset class with with upside and opportunity to grow. And as we continue to see the grading volume increase over time, all I think that does is substantiate our thoughts and claims that it is. I think it validates it, and I think it gives us a great opportunity further in the future to see some serious capital appreciation off of the things that we purchase. So listen, I think the hobby is in a fantastic space. I think it's going to be really fascinating to watch this over the next 12 months. These are the kinds of videos that I really love. They can be a little bit dry in terms of content, but in terms of value and in terms of impact, I don't think we have anyone that are any greater than this. So if you enjoyed this video and you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, hit the subscribe button. We do this stuff all the time. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up, and if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. I appreciate you more than I can say. I hope you have an epic one, and I'll talk to you soon, everybody. See you. Bye.